Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show we're talking about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episodes of Instinct. Two great episodes this week. I'm going to, talk about them one at a time. So first of all, let's focus on the first episode. Picking up where last week's episodes dealt with, obviously, the whole, Sleeping Beauty case, and the fact is Cormac is here in New York, but because he knows, the walls are closing in, he's getting a little more sporadic, to the point he ends up attacking and potentially killing the driver that picked him up, but it turns out the driver didn't die. He was just, suffocated. Well, he was just choked till he was unconscious, but Cormac thought he was dead, but he didn't bother to check because he was in such a hurry, and now it turns into this whole giant manhunt. At first, they're trying to keep his identity out of the public's eye so that they can ultimately, track him down. Because the whole point is trying to understand why he did what he did. If he is the killer behind all this, why? And when it came to his father's murder, why specifically did he kill his dad? It's actually kind of interesting because we end up ultimately piecing it all together. Because, Ryan had some idea about everything, which also is interesting because obviously this case hits Ryan pretty hard because for him it's like the killer was right there in front of his face the entire time. He could have solved this. Because for him it's like if he had stopped Cormac all that time ago when he had killed his dad, then maybe none of this would have happened. Those other two victims would be alive and he wouldn't be out here a serial killer on the loose. So he's taking this all personal, which I did appreciate Dylan giving him that pet talk of basically being like, what was it? Show me that, Midwestern, steak eating, corn loving, it's a beautiful morning positivity. And he's like, I'm from Nebraska and not Oklahoma. He's like, yes, I know. But nevertheless, I just thought that was kind of a little neat thing. But they end up using Candace as a means to draw Cormac out because despite everything that he's doing, he still loves his sister. He has a complicated relationship he does with his family, but it's more so about his dad, because it turns out their dad has this perception of being this charming, sweet person. Turns out he was kind of an asshole behind the scene. He was very angry and he took a lot of his anger out on Cormac, so he ended up being the brunt of all of it. But at the very least, Candace and Cormac had each other through the tough time because the blanket, for example, stems from his dad. One day when Cormac was younger, he wet the bed. Their dad flipped out, kicked him outside and is grow up. Until you learn to grow up, don't come back in this house or whatever. So he went to the dock, which is where him and Candace would often go to get away from their dad. She brought that particular blanket to him. So it is almost like this psychological thing of he's comfort, the blanket that brought him comfort during such trying times, he lays on these people that he kills. It's a form of remorse. But it's interesting because when they went to his place, they ended up noticing that there's clippings from talking about the murders. So it's turning into that thing where it's he's kind of getting excited about look at what I'm doing, what I'm capable of. It's so interesting considering the fact is he is so remorseful, but I guess that's supposed to show the transition of at first it's he was a bit remorseful, but now he's kind of enjoying it. Last episode, the whole Dennis situation, the podcast and everything kind of showed you that he's all about kind of enjoying this to a certain extent. I guess because for him, he felt because so much of his life was out of his own control, because it turns out that's why he killed his dad in the first place. Basically, his dad sent the business to Mexico. That's where it was supposed to be. He was going to send Cormac there, but Candace says it herself, Cormac didn't want that life, but the life was kind of forced upon them because of who their dad is. It's he didn't say no because you kind of don't say no to their dad just because, once again, the whole charming thing on the outside, but, when it comes to the family, it's no, he was a right asshole. The fact is, right asshole is in, you get what I'm saying, not as in a correct asshole, just a surefire asshole is what I'm trying to say. I do apologize. I kind of made that more confusing than it needed to be. But that's what kind of stemmed that murder. And then the other two murders were connected to covering up that first murder. Well, because the third murder was about covering up the second murder because the third dude saw him with the second victim. So, because at first, Candace is having a hard time digesting this because it's there's even a part of her is oh, maybe you guys got it wrong, but it's no, we didn't. We're 100% sure it's your brother, because she just couldn't believe that her brother was capable of this. At first she kind of snaps at Ryan because like the whole point was to kind of bring him in alive, and Ryan was trying that, but Ryan ended up shooting him. But Candace like kind of yells at Ryan that the fact of the matter is you kind of messed up and everything. Like, oh, I'm getting out of here. But Lizzie talked to her because it's like, hey, as someone with a sister, she can understand, because for her it's like, no matter what kind of trouble your sibling gets into, no matter how pissed off you might be or like how terrible the thing is that they might have done, you're always going to be worried when you know that they're potentially out there hurt and alone. So Lizzie can understand that even with these complicated situations that Candace still has, cares for her brother. It's actually interesting too because it was like a little bit of dialogue. I didn't necessarily pick up on that. Maybe they mentioned it in the last episode and I didn't remember it, but Dylan points out the fact is Candace and Ryan used to date, and I love Ryan being like, yeah, I don't know why that's important in any shape or form. There's a whole Candace reaching out to Dennis. They're using Dennis as a means to kind of put her Candace's message out there to Cormac. At first, like obviously they were keeping his identity secret, but then Jasmine wants to put it public because it turns out Dennis is going to get like a secret, podcast talk with the killer, because I guess Cormac had reached out to him, but it turns out it was a trap. It's like, hey, I got this dude as a hostage, so back off. So it's actually kind of interesting because even Dylan had said like basically this might all be a lure for Ryan. It's actually kind of interesting because he was basically saying like the reason why this is so personal. Yes, it started off with killing his dad because it was personal, and obviously the rest of it's been covering up for that personal murder, but it's like, why is he going so hard after Ryan? Because for him it's like Ryan is everything that he's not. He's the perfect son, because as you look at Ryan's life, everything's been good. He basically has the freedom to kind of live the life that he wants to, and mom that's so proud of him. He doesn't have to deal with the whole which granted, we don't even know about his dad's situation. We met his mom, but maybe his dad's dead. Maybe he just never met with his dad while he was in town. Maybe his dad was just never in the picture. But the fact is he has such a good relationship with his mom, it probably pisses Ryan Cormac off that like you're good, you don't have these expectations kind of put on you like I did. So, and for him too, it's also the added bonus of, because you ruined my relationship with my sister, my relationship with Candace is all I had left. It's kind of making him go a little more unhinged. Like he's willing, like the walls are already closing in and he feels so alone, and Ryan tries to talk to him and it starts working a little bit, but it doesn't work completely because he blames Ryan for everything falling apart, including his relationship with Candace. But then you have Dylan showing up, and I thought it was kind of neat, Dylan being like, oh, wipe away your tears, why don't you grow up and be a man, saying what his dad would have, Cormac's dad would have said to him to get him distracted. And long enough they did it. Ryan put up a fight, but luckily Lizzie was there to put a bullet in Cormac's leg to take him down. So it kind of ends off nicely in the regard of like, okay, it's all solved, and Candace gets her moment with Cormac. It's kind of interesting because you kind of see her kind of walking past Ryan. So part of me wonders, has part of her not really forgiven him, or is things just kind of awkward? Like their past is their past, and this is now. But I'm wondering what that would even mean for their relationship, because it's like, yeah, I'm the cop that brought your brother in. Yes, your brother was a serial killer and everything, but it's like, I think it might be more so the ending, still struggling with the fact is my brother is a serial killer, and how I live with that, how I deal with that. I think it's kind of the big focus of that situation. So I also do love the element of this episode. Well, I also love this line where it's like, because initially Dylan didn't want them to do the whole thing going where Cormac wanted to set up, because they want a more isolated place where it's like, yeah, there's people around, but they can control the area. He ended up picking a very wide open area. Dylan was kind of know about it, and it's like, oh, this is the wrong idea. And Liz like, oh, really? You haven't made that clear? He's like, I hate it when we disagree. She's like, oh, please, you love it when we disagree. And he kind of smiles because he does. Because that's what makes the relationship work so well, is the fact is they constantly butt heads like that. So I thought that was kind of neat. I also love the little tidbit of the episode where it's like, can't nobody get in contact with Julian, which obviously that's a bigger point next episode, but I'll get that in a second. So I just thought that was kind of neat. All the while, there's everything with Andy, being like, oh yeah, your dad's here. It's like, wait, what? Then later on, it's like, yeah, no, your dad's actually here now. Like, he came by earlier, but now he's actually here. So, and it was actually a nice little heart-to-heart Dylan had with his dad, where it's like, I know the fact is that, you're not always like the most, not very good at kind of showing his emotions, not always kind of the most compassionate person. But and I know I wasn't always the easiest person, the easiest son to raise, but I always know, no matter what the circumstances may be, that you do love me, and you've always, even when you've disagreed, you've always given me the freedom to live my life the way I want to. So thank you. I thought that was kind of a beautiful thing, but it's like, yep, I'm also here for other news. It turns out your friend Julian, yeah, that malware, that virus that he's supposed to be fighting on the NYPD's systems, yeah, apparently he put it there. And you have Dylan be like, there's no way Julian would have betrayed anyone, especially not betrayed me. It's like, well, I'm just, telling you how it is. And I was like, oh, that's interesting that we're setting it up to look like that. And then the next episode, we have Dylan having a nightmare about it, which I love. The fact is that he dreams of Julian in a suit and everything. And Julian's like, oh, yeah, I don't know why I'm here either. And the fact is that I'm sitting here on your bed in a pinstripe suit reading the business section. And it's like, well, usually, Dylan's like, I usually have a nightmare like after my dad arrives. And now, but I'm seeing you as him because now I feel like you have secret. Now, I thought this was such an interesting line where he's like, oh, you, and he was like, oh, yeah, of course it would hit you a certain way thinking I might have betrayed you because you are susceptible to betrayal, especially when it comes to people in the workplace. But luckily for you, the worst of the worst is dead by now. And then there's me. I thought that was so interesting. But I guess that's going to play a point later on. So we'll kind of circle back. We'll kind of hold that for now. But obviously Dylan's dealing with that while they're dealing with this new case, which it turns out it looks like a double homicide suicide. Where basically, apparently this son of these people who run this brewery, his name's Lewis, he killed his brother-in-law Phil and his mother Gretchen, and the only surviving member is Angela. So it turns into this whole thing of like, okay, so like, what's going on with this whole situation? Because I even love Doug being like, yeah, I got, he got some Yankee tickets. So it's like, yeah, this is case closed. Ha ha ha. And it's like, nope, actually there's a lot more to it because of the positioning of the gunshot when it came to Lewis. It's like, no, that didn't make any sense. But now it turns into this thing of like, well, because Lewis is kind of the screw up in the family. So it's not like he's that far from the criminal world. So it's like, it wouldn't be too much of a surprise that he did this. Then there's the whole conversation because it turns out Gretchen was actually paying, fees, protection fees, but then they go visit one of the old school kind of bookies in town and, who's connected to organized crime. But Tony's like, yeah, I kind of let her do it because of nostalgia's sake, even though I don't have the muscle to actually, do anything. I also love that the situation ended with Dylan eating a pizza with his bare hands. I didn't even realize that until Lizzie made a point to be like, oh yeah, like, no, you can do it. And he was like, right, I forgot, that's his thing. He eats pizza with a fork and knife, and he takes a bite of the pizza because he's just kind of like, how do I go about eating this? I wonder, has he eaten pizza like that his entire life? The fact is that he acted like that, but he takes a bite of it and it's like, oh, it's actually pretty good and it's pretty cool. So I expect us to see Dylan eating a pizza like most people do. But I mean, nothing wrong with eating a pizza with a fork and knife. I can actually admit it. I've eaten a pizza with, it's usually like those more, I don't know what you'd call them. They're like they're like small personal pan pizzas, not that you get like from like a grocery store or something like that. Those ones that you can like pop in the oven for a little bit, heat it up. Little frozen pizzas is the word I was trying to look for. I've eaten those with a fork in a bass. I don't know, fork and knife. Just a fork, I think. Regardless, I've done that. Regardless, it's just a whole thing. I'm going in a huge tangent, but nevertheless. Then all the while, there's the whole Lizzie and Julian thing, them having their very, obviously very amicable breakup. Obviously, it's been very awkward and complicated, but still, they're having this whole thing of like, what was the word they came up with? I think it was like give by. Basically, there's words to kind of describe like a lot of situations, but it's like, what is the word for this one? Like, when you have to give back your ex their stuff. And they came up with give by, and it seems amicable, everything's good until Lizzie looks in and it's like, oh, here's some Chanel sunglasses. She goes to return them, and lo and behold, she sees Julian with another woman. Obviously, she gets a little pissy throughout the case, especially towards Dylan. She kind of gets a little nippy, but obviously that's just because she's upset with the whole circumstance. And Dylan's like, talk to me. For her, she starts incorporating. It's not like a whole like, oh, he just started dating immediately after. It's like, oh, you're already moved on type of thing. It's like, no, she went to a place I didn't even think of. I thought that was where her thought was, but her thought was starting to be like, basically he lied about all these other secret missions, that basically it was about him meeting up with some other woman, that the entire time that's what that was about. And she describes a woman as like, oh, that was Maya. Okay, no, that Maya is part of, an intelligence agency. The fact of the matter is her and Julia meeting up, purely work. I'm sure that's all it really is. He would never betray someone. He definitely wouldn't betray you. And it's like, wait, does that mean he would betray you? And Dylan's like, no, he wouldn't. Because at first it's like, obviously he's up to some stuff recently, but none of them knows. And, Lizzie starts to think maybe we don't know him as well as we do. We don't know Julian as well as we think we do. I also love that little backstory to this entire episode. It's like Fucci getting Ryan to handle all the paperwork. And then, like, you have Lizzie being like, you're not really going to let that slide, Jasmine. And Jasmine's kind of like, the fact of the matter is, I'm sure it's not really all like that. I'm sure Fucci's handling his own. All right, yeah, the same Fucci who tased himself so that he can win a bet. And Jasmine's like, yeah, I'm just going to pretend like it is. Tell me that is. That way I don't have to worry about getting in the middle of a grown man situation. I even love the whole thing of like, yo, where's Ryan? The fact is, he wrote this out. He needs to type this out. Tell him to type it out on my computer. Don't look in my search history. It's like, okay, sure. I love that. I love that. It's actually kind of sweet. You could tell he actually is going to miss Ryan, but he doesn't want to admit it. And at that very end, he's kind of like, it's like, oh yeah, you finally did all that good work, because Ryan's like, yeah, actually, Fucci, you actually been a great partner. He's like, really? It's like, actually, great's kind of the wrong word. Interesting. Fucci's like, no, I'm a great partner. And it's like, go and you have Lizzie being like, Fucci, just say what we're all saying, how we're all going to feel, that we're going to miss Ryan. And you see Fucci kind of choking up a little bit. It's like, oh, you actually been really good, and then I might miss you or whatever. And it's like, look at you getting all emotional about it. His little bromance, new partner and everything has actually been really good and really dope. I tell that was so beautiful how that, and I love that just being like a little bit of a plot thing, like all throughout the episode, just little bits here and there kind of getting dropped on you. So I thought that was pretty neat. Then there's the whole Andy thing, because it turns out Andy has been lying. He's like, what have you been lying about, Andy? Oh, you're throwing a surprise party for Dylan. I was like, oh, that's super sweet. And it's like they had to cover it up, and Andy feels so bad about it because he's such a terrible liar, even to the point when Lizzie is come to meet him. It's like, wait, does Dylan know? Did you come up with a good excuse? Did he ask where you were going? She was like, no, it's all good, Andy. He was nervous because of multiple reasons. One, the whole having to keep his secret thing's not easy for him because he's not very good at lying. Turns out he's actually good enough because he was able to fool Dylan, but I guess you can make the argument. It's like, I think it's kind of ironic because it's like, oh, there's a whole thing about Dylan not knowing that if he can trust Julian or not while he has Andy technically lying to him. Yes, it's all in fun. It's meant to be for a surprise, but it just, I think when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, it's actually kind of funny. Regardless, it turns out that Samantha's ex, the baby daddy, apparently a lawyer from him is reaching out. So it's like, which is interesting. Basically, it's like, I'll sign over all rights if you pay a certain amount. It's kind of the whole point. But Lizzie had to kind of kick, Andy in the butt to kind of get him motivated to be like, yo, come on. You helped me out not too long ago, the whole situation with that dude trying to get money off of her in season 1. That dude who's kind of run that scam on multiple women, kind of pretends to get hurt and then sues them or whatever. So as you help me during that situation, what you need to do is be your own lawyer. Like, handle this like how you would if you were representing someone else. So represent yourself, because obviously the caterer is going to be here in 30 minutes. So kind of get your shit together, basically. I thought that was kind of neat. And it's like, oh, that's why my husband loves working with you so much. It's like, oh, please, he never listens to me. That's why I like you so much more. It's like, I love that type of dynamic that Andy and Lizzie have. But it is a very interesting turn of events in this episode. Well, it's actually kind of interesting. I'm about to say, like, oh, isn't this one of the first times it's actually not? I'm about to say that they have a dirty cop. It's like, no, like, literally that was the whole Charlie plot line last season, was like there was a dirty cop. Well, McCall ends up being a dirty cop because he's the beat cop involved in all this, because it turns out this brewery is also connected to, like, gun trafficking. Well, it turns out, like, because they kind of pieced it together, because he was the first one to kind of jump on Lewis being the number one suspect and just everything. He was a quick one to be like, oh yeah, Lewis is responsible for all this. He was the one that kind of made it all seem like a double murder, suicide type of situation. The fact of the matter is, it just like all the like arrest of like people connected to that criminal world of gun trafficking. He was the officer involved, and like the gun's history was also connected to him arresting a particular person involved. So it's like all things point to him. So it turns out basically he made a deal with Lewis to kind of traffic guns through the brewery, but Lewis, kind of being terrible with money, needed more money, so he wanted a bigger cut operation. Struggle happened, bam. He ends up killing Lewis just to kind of get rid of him. Gretchen and Phil walk in, and they have to be taken out as well. I was kind of worried not worried, but I kept thinking, like, it's going to end up being the bookkeeper, isn't it? And it turns out not to be the case at all. It ended up being a dirty cop, which obviously Lizzie didn't like, because it's like, like I said, not the first time, but I don't think it makes it any easier later points anytime too. It is kind of interesting too, because like, but even before Dylan got to it, I was like, yeah, it is kind of interesting when he started firing wildly to kind of spread the bullets around to kind of mess up the scene a little bit. The fact is, one of the stray bullets hit the van that was leaving with the weapons and stuff. It went through the gas tank and hit the tire. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's like, ironically, you trying to fake the scene ended up kind of being ultimately your undoing to a certain extent. So that was interesting. Along with all that is the surprise party finally happening. Everyone's gathered. I love you see in the background Harris is on the phone. Fucci's holding it up and everything. I love Harris being like, explain to everyone why I'm not there. He's like, yeah. Your daughter's doing a dance or something. He's like, no, my daughter's on the debate team. She's like the head of the debate. I just love that little tidbit of like why he's not there. I just thought that was kind of neat. But yeah, I just loved everyone kind of gathered, because, Dylan had talked about it before, like, because it was so interesting, because Andy was like, yeah, why is it that you only told Lizzie? Because it's one of those things of like, Dylan's just waiting for the other shoe to drop. So for him, it's like, I just want everything to kind of be perfect. He's worried that because this whole adoption thing could go wrong in many different ways, and he wants it to go down perfectly. So I guess for him, it's almost like he doesn't want to tell other people because it would make it, a little too real. It'll basically chance it. Like if he puts it out there in the universe by telling other people, it's like, oh, the universe might kind of interfere and make things up. So it's like, no, got to believe, got to put it out there that the universe is going to let this happen. It's kind of what Andy was trying to tell him to do, which they do get the gender reveal in this episode. They're having a baby boy, which I think is very befitting. Because obviously, for Dylan, I'm sure he's going to look at this situation, and he even talked about it before, that look at this situation as his situation, like, raise his child very differently than his dad did, raised him. So I think that's kind of a nice element to it. It's just kind of like, once again, especially now he realizes like, yeah, he has a different appreciation for his dad raising him and everything. So I even love the little tidbit between Lizzie and Jasmine where it's like, if she ever has a baby herself, and it's like, right, don't throw your surprise party, because you're like, yeah, good, because if you did, I'd have to kill you. Which is like, oh, I'm wondering if they're setting something up there. The fact is, it's just like a little bit of a conversation. Maybe it's just flavored convo, but I feel like there might be more to that. That might be foreshadowing some stuff. There might be some plans later on. Regardless, Dylan meeting up with Julian and finally kind of getting an understanding of everything that's going down. It's like, I kept you in the dark because you wanted to be away from the spy world and everything, but kind of fills him in on everything, that basically they're trying to track down who's ever responsible for all this. Like, because Dylan had asked Zach, like, oh, what had it going down? It's like, oh yeah, at one point everything seems normal, but the fact is the firewall to the system went down for like a couple minutes the other day, and turns out Julian was behind that because it was supposed to be a means of kind of drawing out who's ever responsible for all this. They end up bringing up a particular name, Patrick, and so it's like, no, it couldn't be him. We killed him. I think this is one of those instances where Julian inside of Dylan's dream had referenced where it's like, oh yeah, being betrayed by those you work with. So it seems like, the reason why he'd be coming after someone like Julian, I'm skipping ahead, but the reason why he'd be coming after Julian and whatnot is because of that, because they go back to their spy days, and he was a traitor, and basically Dylan put a bullet in his head, and maybe that's kind of the whole point. That's probably why he's looking into NYPD specific, because they even said like him, trying to attack first responders seemed like something he would do. So that's kind of his cup of tea. But I'm sure it also has to deal with Dylan, because Dylan works at the NYPD. So maybe that's supposed to be a blow against him. But, you know, they go up to check on Maya, but it turns out she's been dead for a while. The room is there to make it seem like, oh, Julian's responsible. It's interesting, but he ends up looking through her pocketbook. I'm wondering, is it the device they end up finding later on? But part of me thinks it has to be the sunglasses that Lizzie has. There must be something significant in them. Like, he was reaching for something because he was looking for them, but they never kind of elaborate. Like I said, I don't think it was like what they end up finding later on. I think it is the sunglasses. There might be something kind of sensitive in those, but basically she had a file recording kind of showing what ends up, not necessarily what happens to her, but kind of pointing out that, like, oh, the dude that they were worried about, he is still alive. And this whole thing has been about his plan for revenge. What's interesting, though, is because we find out that Maya actually isn't here in New York on MI6 business. Basically, she kind of gathers info for them, but she's not actually there as an operative or something like that. So it begs the question, is she working with this dude and he ended up betraying her and she had, like, some contingencies, but then, like, why? Well, because I was wondering if the whole Julian thing was meant to be a betrayal from the very beginning, that she was actually working against him. I mean, to be fair, there's the whole leaks in the CIA situation too. I guess that kind of further proves that he was part of the CIA, considering he was able to get the information to Dylan's dad to be like, oh, Julian. Obviously, he didn't do it directly. He probably, like, sprinkled it into the right systems to be like, oh, yeah, Julian. Or maybe at the very least, he knows what routes to go to kind of make everything seem like it was coming from Julian, that he was responsible for what was going on or whatever. So we'll see. But now it's like, that's going to get interesting, because I'm sure this is going to become like Lizzie's case, and then, like, it's going to be the whole thing of, is Dylan going to tell her everything, because there's not supposed to be any more secrets. So now they're probably going to, well, depends on how he handles it, because it might be a thing where Dylan and Julian have to work this situation together while hiding it from Lizzie, trying to stay one step ahead of the investigation. Maybe it's that. Maybe this is when it gets revealed to Jasmine who Julian really is. Maybe all that's going to come out. I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see where all this takes us, especially considering next week's episode is, in fact, the season finale. I'm very interested to see how this whole situation plays out and understand more about, I think this is going to be a good look into Julian and Dylan's past. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good